It rots the senses in the head. It kills imagination dead. It clogs and clutters up the mind. It makes a child so dull and blind he can no longer understand a fantasy, a fairyland. His brain becomes as soft as cheese. His powers of thinking rust and freeze. He cannot think, he only sees. All right, you'll cry. All right, you'll say. But if we take the set away, what shall we do to entertain our darling children? Please explain. We'll answer you by asking you, what used the darlings once to do? How used they keep themselves content before this monster was invented? Have you forgotten? Do you know? We'll say it very loud and slow. They used to read. They'd read and read and read and read, and then proceed to read some more. Great Scott Gadzooks, one half their lives was reading books. The nursery shelves held books galore. The books cluttered up the nursery floor, and in the bedroom by the bed, more books were waiting to be read. Such wondrous fine, fantastic tales of dragons, gypsies, queens, and whales. And Treasure Isle and distant shores, where smugglers rode with muffled oars, and pirates wearing purple pants, and sailing ships and elephants, and cannibals crouching round the pot, stirring away at something hot. It smells so good, what can it be? Good gracious, it's Penelope. The younger ones had Beatrice Potter, with Mr. Todd, the dirty rotter, and Squirrel Nutkins, Pigling Bland, and Mrs. Tingley Winkle, and just how the camel got his hump, and how the monkey lost his rump, and Mr. Toad, and bless my soul, there's a Mr. Rat and Mr. Mole. Oh, books, what books they used to know, those children living long ago. Oh, please, we beg, we pray, go throw away your TV set away, and in its place you can install a lovely bookshelf on the wall. Then fill the shelves with lots of books, ignoring all the dirty looks, the screams and yells, and the bites and kicks, and children hitting you with sticks. Fear not, because we promise you that in about a week or two of having nothing else to do, they'll now begin to feel the need to having something good to read. And once they start, oh boy, you'll watch the slowly growing joy that fills their hearts. They'll grow so keen, they'll wonder what they'd ever seen in that ridiculous machine, that nauseating, foul, unclean, repulsive television screen. And later, each and every kid will love you more for what you did. P.S. Regard McTV. We very much regret that we shall simply have to wait and see if we can get him back at his height, but if we can't, it serves him right. Chapter 28, Only Charlie Left. Which room shall it be next? Said Mr. Wonka as he turned away and darted into the elevator. Come on, hurry up, we must get going. And how many children are there left now? Little Charlie looked at Grandpa Joe, and Grandpa Joe looked back at little Charlie. But Mr. Wonka, Grandpa Joe called after him. There's only Charlie left now. Mr. Wonka swung around and stared at Charlie. There was a silence. Charlie stood there holding tightly onto Grandpa Joe's hand. You mean you're the only one left? Mr. Wonka said, pretending to be surprised. Why, yes, whispered Charlie, yes. Mr. Wonka suddenly exploded with excitement. But, my dear boy, he cried out, that means you've won. He rushed out of the elevator and started shaking Charlie's hand so furiously it nearly came off. Oh, I do congratulate you, he cried. I really do. I'm absolutely delighted. It couldn't be better. How wonderful this is. I had a hunch, right from the beginning, that it was going to be you. Well done, Charlie, well done. This is terrific. Now the fun is really going to start. But we mustn't dilly, we mustn't dally. There's even less time to lose now than there was before. We have an enormous number of things to do before the day is out. Just think of the arrangements that have to be made, and the people we have to fetch. But luckily for us, we have the great glass elevator to speed things up. Jump in, my dear Charlie, jump in. You too, Grandpa Joe, sir. No, after you. That's the way. Now then, this time I shall choose the button we are going to press. Mr. Wonka's bright, twinkling blue eyes rested for a moment on Charlie's face. Something crazy is going to happen now, Charlie thought, but he wasn't frightened. He wasn't even nervous. He was just terrifically excited, and so was Grandpa Joe. The old man's face was shining with excitement as he watched every move that Mr. Wonka made. Mr. Wonka was reaching for a button high up on the glass ceiling of the elevator. Charlie and Grandpa Joe both craned their necks to read what it said on the label out beside the button. It said, "Up and Out." "Up and out," thought Charlie. "What sort of room is that?" Mr. Wonka pressed the button. The glass doors closed. "Hold on," cried Mr. Wonka. Then wham! The elevator shot straight up like a rocket. "Yippee!" shouted Grandpa Joe, and Charlie was clinging onto Grandpa Joe's legs, and Mr. Wonka was holding onto the strap from the ceiling, and they went up, 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 and straight up, this time no twisting or turnings, and Charlie could hear the whistling of air outside as the elevator went faster and faster. "Yippee!" shouted Grandpa Joe again. "Yippee! Here we go!" "Faster!" cried Mr. Wonka, banging the wall of the elevator with his hand. "Faster, faster! If we don't go any faster than this, we shall never get through." "Through what?" shouted Grandpa Joe. "What have we got to get through?" "Aha!" cried Mr. Wonka. "You wait and see. I've been longing to press this button for years, but I've never done it until now. I was tempted many times. Oh, yes, I was tempted. But I couldn't bear the thought of making a great big hole in the roof of the factory. Here we go, up, boys, up and out." "But you don't mean," shouted Grandpa Joe, "you don't really mean this elevator." "Oh, yes, I do," answered Mr. Wonka. "You wait and see. Up and out." But, it's made of glass," shouted Grandpa Joe. "It'll break into a million pieces." "I suppose it might," Mr. Wonka cheerfully as ever, "but it's pretty thick glass, all the same." The elevator rushed on, going up and up, faster and faster and faster. Suddenly, crash! And the most tremendous noise of splintering wood and broken tiles came directly from above their heads. And Grandpa Joe shouted, "Help! It's the end! We're done for!" And Mr. Wonka said, "No, we're not. We're through. We're out." Sure enough, the elevator had shot right out, up through the roof of the factory, and was now rising into the sky like a rocket. And the sunshine was pouring in through the glass roof. In 5 seconds, they were 1,000 feet up in the sky. "The elevator's gone mad, Grandpa Joe," shouted Grandpa Joe. "Have no fear, my dear," said Mr. Wonka calmly, and he pressed another button. The elevator stopped. It stopped and hung mid-air, hovering like a helicopter, hovering over the factory and over the very own town itself, which lay spread out below them like a picture postcard. Looking down through the glass floor on which he was standing, Charlie could see the small, faraway houses and the streets and the snow that lay thickly over everything. It was an eerie and frightening feeling to be standing on clear glass, high up in the sky. It made you feel that you weren't standing on anything at all. "Are we all right?" cried Grandpa Joe. "How does this thing stay up?" "Candy power," said Mr. Wonka. 1,000,000 candy power. "Oh, look," he cried, pointing down. "There go the other children. They're returning home." The other children go home. "We must go down and take a look at our little friends before we do anything else," said Mr. Wonka. He pressed a different button, and the elevator dropped lower, and soon it was hovering just above the entrance gates to the factory. Looking down now, Charlie could see the children and their parents standing in a little group just inside the gates. "I can only see 3, he said. "Who's missing?" "I expect it's Mike Tivy," Mr. Wonka said, "but he'll be coming along soon. Do you see the trucks?" Mr. Wonka pointed to a line of gigantic covered vans parked in a line nearby. "Yes," said Charlie. Charlie said, "What are they for?" "Don't you remember what it said on the golden tickets? Every child goes home with a lifetime supply of candy. There's 1 truckload for each of them, loaded to the brim." "Aha," Mr. Wonka went on, "and there goes our friend Augustus Gloop. Do you see him? He's getting into the first truck with his mother and father." "You mean he's really all right?" asked Charlie, astonished. "Even after going up in that awful pipe?" "He's very much all right," said Mr. Wonka. "He's changed," said Grandpa Joe, peering down through the glass of the wall of the elevator. "He's used to be fat. Now he's thin as a straw." "Of course he's changed," said Mr. Wonka, laughing. "He got squeezed in the pipe." Don't you remember? And look, there goes Violet Beauregard, the great gum chewer. It seems as though they've managed to dejuice her after all. I'm so glad, and how healthy she looks. Much better than before. But she's purple in the face, cried Grandpa Joe. So she is, said Mr. Wonka. Ah, well, there's nothing we can do about that. Good gracious, cried Charlie. Look at poor Veruca Salt and Mr. Salt and Mrs. Salt. They're simply covered in garbage. And here comes Mike TV, said Grandpa Joe. Good heavens, what have they done to him? He's about 10 feet tall and thin as a wire. They've overstretched him on the gun stretching machine, said Mr. Wonka. How very careless. But how dreadful for him, cried Charlie. Nonsense, said Mr. Wonka. He's very lucky. Every basketball team in the country will be trying to get him. But now, he added, it's time we left these 4 silly children. I have something very important to talk to you about, my dear Charlie. Mr. Wonka pressed another button, and the elevator swung upwards into the sky. Chapter 30. Charlie's Chocolate Factory. The great glass elevator was now hovering high over the town. Inside the elevator stood Mr. Wonka, Grandpa Joe, and little Charlie. How I love my chocolate factory, said Mr. Wonka, gazing down. Then he paused and he turned around and he looked at Charlie with a most serious expression on his face. Do you love it too, Charlie? Oh, yes, cried Charlie. I think it's the most wonderful place in the whole world. I'm very pleased to hear you say that, said Mr. Wonka, looking more serious than ever. Went on staring at Charlie. Yes, he said, I am very pleased indeed to hear you say that, and now I should tell you why. Mr. Wonka cocked his head to one side, and all at once the tiny twinkle wrinkles of a smile appeared around the corners of his eyes, and he said, You see, my dear boy, I have decided to make you a present of the whole place. As soon as you are old enough to run it, the entire factory will become yours. Charlie stared at Mr. Wonka. Grandpa Joe opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. It's quite true, Mr. Wonka said, smiling broadly now. I am giving it to you. That's right, isn't it? That's all right, isn't it? Giving it to him, gasped Uncle Joe. You must be joking. I'm not joking, sir. I'm deadly serious. But why should you want to give your factory to little Charlie? Listen, Mr. Wonka said. I'm an old man, much older than you think. I can't go forever. I've got no children of my own, no family at all. So who is going to run the factory when I get too old to do it myself? Someone's got to keep it going, if only for the sake of the Oompa Loompas. Mind you, there are thousands of clever men who would give anything for the chance to come in and take over from me. But I don't want that sort of person. I don't want a grown-up person at all. A grown-up won't listen to me. He won't learn. He will try to do things his own way and not mine. So I have to have a child. I want a good, sensible, loving child, one to whom I can tell all my most precious candy-making secrets while I am still alive. So that is why you sent out the golden tickets, cried Charlie. Exactly, said Mr. Wonka. I decided to invite 5 children to the factory, and the one I liked the best at the end of the day would be the winner. But Mr. Wonka, stammered Grandpa Joe, do you really truly mean that you're giving the whole of this enormous factory to little Charlie after all? There's no time for arguments, cried Mr. Wonka. We must go at once and fetch the rest of the family, Charlie's father and his mother and anyone else that's around. They can all live in the factory from now on. They can all help to run it until Charlie is old enough to do it by himself. Where do you live, Charlie? Charlie peered down through the glass elevator at the snow-covered houses that lay below. It's over there, he said, pointing. It's the little cottage right on the edge of town, the little tiny little one. I see it, cried Mr. Wonka, and he pressed some more buttons, and the elevator shot down towards Charlie's house. I'm afraid my mother won't come with us, Charlie said sadly. Why ever not? Because she won't leave Grandma Josephine and Grandma Georgina and Grandpa George. But they must come too. They can't. They're very old and they haven't been out of bed for 20 years. Then we'll take the bed along as well, with them in it, said Mr. Wonka. There's plenty of room in this elevator for a bed. You couldn't get the bed out of the house, said Grandpa Joe. It won't go through the door. You mustn't